The fluorescent lights in the medical lab hummed with a sterile monotony that matched the rhythm of Mateo Mendez's heartbeat. He'd been a soldier for exactly 3 weeks, and already he was learning that the Army ran on routines. Wake at 0500, inspection at 0600, drills until your muscles screamed, sleep when they told you to sleep. So when the summons came, Private Mendez, report to Building C, Room 14. He assumed it was standard issue, maybe a vaccination he'd missed, maybe a paperwork error. He was 21 years old, his uniform still crisp with newness, his boots still shiny enough to catch his reflection. He'd dreamed of this moment since he was 12, watching 4th of July parades in San Antonio, watching soldiers march past with flags snapping in the Texas wind. He'd enlisted the day after his birthday, much to his father's disapproval. Bruno Mendez didn't understand patriotism, didn't understand why his son would want to leave the family business, the comfortable life they'd built. But Mateo had always felt different, like he was meant for something more, like he was searching for something he couldn't name. He pushed open the door to room 14, expecting to see a nurse or a corpsman. Instead, he found himself facing a man in uniform whose chest was covered in ribbons and insignia that spoke of decades of service. The nameplate read, Brigadier General Martin Smith. Mateo snapped to attention, his heart suddenly hammering. Sir, Private Mendez reporting as ordered. The general didn't speak immediately. He just stared at Mateo with an intensity that made the young soldier's skin prickle. The man's eyes, sharp, gray, weathered, seemed to be searching for something. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by something Mateo couldn't identify. Pain, maybe. Or hope. At ease, Private, the general said finally. His voice was rough, like gravel under boots. Have a seat. Mateo sat, his spine rigid, his hand folded in his lap. The room was small, windowless, with nothing but a table, 3 chairs, and a manila folder that sat between them like a loaded weapon. Private Mendez, the general began, his fingers drumming once on the folder. I need to ask you some questions, personal questions, and I need you to answer them honestly. Yes, sir. Where were you born? Mateo blinked. San Antonio, Texas, sir. What's your date of birth? March 3rd, 2004, sir. The general's jaw tightened. And your parents? Their names? Bruno and Maria Mendez? Wait, sir. Tell me about your childhood, Private. Your earliest memories. Mateo shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't protocol. This was personal, invasive. But the general's rank demanded compliance. I don't remember much before I was about 6 or 7, sir. My father said I was sick as a child, some kind of fever. It affected my memory. The general's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. What did your father do for a living? He ran a construction business, sir. Small jobs, mostly residential. And your mother? She passed away when I was 8, sir. Cancer. The general closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing a blow. When he opened them again, they were harder, colder. Private Mendez, what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I need you to listen carefully. Mateo's pulse quickened. Yes, sir. The general opened the folder. Inside were photographs, old ones, faded at the edges. The first showed a young couple, maybe in their late 20s. The man wore a military dress uniform, the woman a soft yellow sundress. Between them stood a small boy, maybe 4 or 5, with dark curly hair and a gap-toothed smile. Do you recognize anyone in this photo, Private? Mateo studied the image. There was something familiar about the child's face, the shape of the eyes, the dimple in the chin, but he couldn't place it. No, sir. The general pulled out another photograph. This one showed the same little boy, older now, maybe 5. He was sitting on a swing set, laughing at whoever was behind the camera. Beside him was a woman with gentle eyes and long dark hair. How about now? Mateo's throat tightened. He didn't know why, but the image stirred something deep inside him, a feeling, not a memory, like déjà vu. I'm not sure, sir. The general leaned forward, his voice dropping to us just above a whisper. That boy's name was Nelson Smith. He was my son. 21 years ago, he was taken from his home in Fort Hood, Texas. He was 4 years old. His mother, Celine, disappeared with him. We searched for months. The FBI, local police, private investigators, everyone. But it was like they'd vanished into thin air. Mateo's stomach twisted. Sir, I don't understand. 3 weeks ago, the general continued, his voice steady but strained. When you enlisted, you underwent a standard medical screening. Blood work, fingerprints, the usual. Those records are entered into a federal database, cross-referenced against other databases, missing persons, criminal records, outstanding warrants. The general pulled a sheet of paper from the folder and slid it across the table. It was a DNA analysis report. Mateo's eyes scanned the technical jargon, the percentages, the conclusions. Subject: Mateo Mendez. DNA match: 99.97% probability of paternal relation to Brigadier General Martin Smith. The words blurred. The room tilted. That's not possible, Mateo whispered. There's been a mistake. I'm Mateo Mendez. My father is Bruno Mendez. I've lived in San Antonio my whole life. The general's voice was gentle now, almost fatherly. No, son, you haven't. Your name is Nelson Smith. You were born on March 3rd, 2000, not 2004. You're 25 years old, not 21. And the man you call your father is the man who took you. Mateo stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. No. This is insane. My father, he raised me, he attended the same church as my family, the general said, his voice hardening. He befriended us, sat in the same pew, said amen to the same prayers. And then, one Sunday morning, while I was deployed overseas, he walked into our home and took everything that mattered to me. Mateo's hands were shaking. Where's my mother? You said she disappeared too. Where is she? The general's face crumbled just for a second before he regained control. We don't know. We're still searching. The room felt too small, the air too thin. Mateo couldn't breathe. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be. He'd grown up with Bruno, had gone to school, had friends, had memories. Except he didn't. Not really. His childhood was a blur, a handful of disconnected images. He'd always assumed it was the fever his father mentioned, the illness that had stolen his early years. But now, I want a second test, Mateo said, his voice cracking. I want to verify this. We've already run it 3 times, the general said quietly. You're my son, Nelson. I've been searching for you for 21 years. The words hung in the air like smoke. Mateo sank back into the chair, his head in his hands. What happens now? Now, the general said, we find out what happened. We find out where Bruno Mendez is, and we bring him to justice. 3 days earlier, Bruno Mendez stood in the small kitchen of his San Antonio home, frying eggs in a cast-iron skillet. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows across the cracked linoleum floor. The house was quiet. It had been quiet for 3 weeks, ever since Mateo left for basic training. Bruno was 57 years old, with calloused hands and a weathered face that spoke of years spent working in the Texas sun. His black hair was streaked with gray now, his shoulders slightly stooped. He'd raised Mateo alone after Maria died. It hadn't been easy, but he'd done his best. He'd given the boy a home, food, education. He'd taught him how to fix a leaking pipe, how to swing a hammer, how to be a man. And now Mateo was gone, off to serve his country. Bruno should have been proud, but instead, he felt a gnawing dread that had been growing in his gut for weeks. He'd known this day would come eventually. He'd always known. You couldn't run forever. You couldn't hide from the truth, no matter how deep you buried it. He finished the eggs and sat down at the kitchen table, but he didn't eat. He just stared at the plate, at the steam rising in lazy spirals. The phone rang. Bruno didn't move. He knew who it was, or rather, what it was, the past finally catching up. He let it ring, once, twice, 10 times. Then it stopped. 30 seconds later, it started again. This time, Bruno stood and walked to the phone. He picked up the receiver, held it to his ear, but didn't speak. "Mr. Mendez?" The voice on the other end was professional, clipped. "This is Agent Laura Hastings with the FBI. We need to speak with you regarding your son, Mateo Mendez." Bruno closed his eyes. "What about him?" "We'd like you to come down to the San Antonio field office, today if possible." "Am I under arrest?" A pause. "Not yet, but we do need to speak with you." "It's important." Bruno hung up the phone without another word. He walked to the bedroom, pulled a duffel bag from the closet, and began packing. Clothes, cash he'd kept hidden in a shoebox, a passport under a different name. He'd prepared for this years ago, back when Mateo was still a child, back when the nightmares kept him awake. He zipped the bag closed and stood in the doorway, looking around the small house. The home he'd built, the life he'd created. It had been a good life in its way, quiet, safe, but it had been built on a lie. And now the lie was collapsing. 21 years earlier, Bruno Mendez wasn't a bad man. At least, that's what he told himself. He was 36 years old, working construction jobs across Texas, moving from town to town, sleeping in cheap motels. He'd been married once. Briefly. But his wife left him when she found out he couldn't give her children. Something about his biology, the doctor said. Low sperm count, nearly impossible to conceive. The divorce had broken something inside him. He'd wanted a family, wanted a son to carry his name, wanted to build something that would last after he was gone. But it wasn't meant to be. So he drifted, worked, drank too much, went to church on Sundays because it was the only place that felt like community, the only place where people smiled at him and shook his hand. That's where he met them. The Smiths. Martins and Celine were the kind of couple everyone envied. Young, attractive, deeply in love. Martins was an army officer, proud and disciplined, always in uniform even on Sundays. Celine was radiant, with dark hair that fell in waves and a laugh that could light up a room. And then there was Nelson, their son, 4 years old with curly hair and bright, curious eyes. The boy was always asking questions, always exploring, always getting into things. Bruno watched them from across the church pews, watched the way Martins held Nelson's hand, watched the way Celine kissed the top of the boy's head, watched the way they smiled at each other, like they had everything they'd ever wanted. And Bruno felt something dark and ugly twist inside him. Envy, resentment, longing. He wanted what they had, wanted it so badly it hurt. He started talking to them after services, casual conversations at first. Weather, work, the pastor's sermon. Martins was friendly, if a bit reserved. Celine was warm, open. Nelson was shy but curious, peeking out from behind his mother's legs. Bruno learned that Martins was about to deploy. 6 months overseas. Celine would be alone with Nelson, managing everything by herself. "If you need anything," Bruno offered, "I'm happy to help. I'm good with my hands. Fixing things, yard work, whatever you need." Celine smiled. "That's very kind of you, Bruno. Thank you." And just like that, he became part of their lives. He fixed their leaking faucet, mowed their lawn, helped Celine carry groceries. He was always around, always helpful, always smiling, and all the while he was planning. Martins deployed in early February. Bruno waited a month, long enough for Celine to settle into a routine, long enough for her to trust him. On a Sunday morning in March, Bruno went to church as usual. Celine was there with Nelson. After the service, she asked if he could help her move a heavy bookshelf in the living room. Of course, Bruno said. They drove to her house. Nelson ran ahead, already pulling out his toy trucks from the closet. Bruno followed Celine inside. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. "It's this one," Celine said, pointing to a tall oak bookshelf against the wall. Bruno nodded. He moved toward it, then stopped. "Actually, Celine, I need to tell you something." She turned, her expression open, trusting. "What is it?" "I'm sorry," Bruno said. And then he struck her. He didn't mean to kill her. That wasn't the plan. But she fought back, harder than he expected. She screamed. She clawed at him. He panicked, grabbed a lamp from the side table and swung. The sound of the impact was sickening. Celine crumpled to the floor, blood pooling beneath her head. Bruno stood there, breathing hard, staring at what he'd done. Nelson appeared in the doorway, clutching his toy truck. He looked at his mother on the floor, then at Bruno, his small face confused. "Mommy?" Bruno's mind raced. He hadn't planned for this, hadn't planned to hurt Celine. He just wanted the boy, just wanted a son. But now, he made a decision. He picked up Nelson, who was too shocked to resist, and carried him to his truck. He buckled him into the passenger seat, covered him with a blanket, and drove. He drove south, toward the border, toward Mexico, toward a life where no one would ask questions. Behind him, Celine Smith lay on her living room floor, her blood soaking into the carpet. Her son gone. Present day. Mateo, Nelson, sat in the small conference room, staring at the photographs spread across the table. The general had left him alone, said he needed time to process, time to think. But Mateo couldn't think. No. His brain felt like static. He picked up one of the photos. It showed a woman, Celine, holding a baby. Her smile was radiant, her eyes full of love. On the back, someone had written, "Nelson, 6 months old." He studied the baby's face. It could have been him, could have been anyone. He tried to remember, tried to pull something, anything from the depths of his mind, but there was nothing, just a vast, empty space where his childhood should have been. The door opened. The general stepped inside, followed by a young woman in a dark suit. She introduced herself as Agent Hastings, FBI. "Private Mendez," she said, sitting across from him. "We've located Bruno Mendez. He's gone. Cleared out his house this morning. We have a bolo out on him. Roadblocks at the border. We'll find him." Mateo nodded numbly. "We need to ask you some questions," Agent Hastings continued, "about your childhood, about Bruno. Anything you remember." "I don't remember anything," Mateo said flatly. "That's common in cases like this," she said gently. "Trauma, especially at a young age, can cause dissociative amnesia, but sometimes, with the right prompts, memories can resurface." She pulled out a small notebook. "Let's start simple. What's your earliest memory?" Mateo thought hard. I remember a yellow house, I think, and a woman. Not my mother, Maria, someone else. She was singing." The general leaned forward. "What was she singing?" "I don't know. Something soft, a lullaby maybe." "Celine used to sing to you every night," the general said quietly. "Your favorite was, 'You Are My Sunshine.'" Mateo closed his eyes. Somewhere, deep in the recesses of his mind, he heard a melody, faint like an echo. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." His chest tightened. I think I remember." Agent Hastings made a note. "Anything else? Any other flashes?" "There was a man, not Bruno, someone in uniform. He used to toss me in the air. I'd laugh and he'd catch me." The general's voice cracked. "I used to do that every evening before dinner." Mateo opened his eyes, looked at the man across from him, this stranger who claimed to be his father, and saw tears streaming down the general's face. For the first time, Mateo felt something shift inside him. Not memory exactly, but recognition, a sense of connection he couldn't explain. "I want to remember," Mateo whispered. "I want to know who I was." We'll help you, Agent Hastings said. But first, we need to find Bruno. See? And we need to find out what happened to your mother. If you're finding this story compelling, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more untold stories to light, stories that need to be heard. Bruno Mendez made it as far as Laredo before the roadblock stopped him. He sat in his truck watching the flashing lights approach and realized he was done running. When the officers pulled him out of the vehicle, he didn't resist. He just stood there, hands behind his back, staring at the ground. "Bruno Mendez," one officer said, "you're under arrest for the kidnapping of Nelson Smith and the murder of Celine Smith." Murder. The word hit him like a freight train. He'd spent 21 years trying not to think about that day, trying to convince himself it had been an accident, that he hadn't meant for Celine to die. But the truth was, he'd killed her, and then he'd stolen her son. They took him to a holding cell in San Antonio. He sat on the cold metal bench, his head in his hands, and waited. Hours later, Agent Hastings walked in. She sat across from him, a recorder on the table between them. "Where is Celine Smith's body?" she asked. Bruno closed his eyes. "There's a construction site outside Fort Hood, off Route 190. We were doing foundation work there in March 2004. I buried her there, under what's now the parking lot of a strip mall." Agent Hastings didn't react. She just made a note. "Why did you take Nelson?" "I wanted a son," Bruno said simply. "I couldn't have one of my own, and I saw how happy they were, the Smiths. I wanted that. I thought I could give him a good life. Better than the one he had. You murdered his mother." "I didn't mean to," Bruno said, his voice breaking. I panicked. She fought back and he couldn't finish." "Did you tell Nelson, Mateo, any of this?" "No. I told him his mother died of cancer. I told him he'd been sick as a child, that it affected his memory. I wanted him to have a normal life. He stopped, shook his head. "It doesn't matter what I wanted. I know what I did. I know I'm going to prison for the rest of my life. I want him to know I loved him. I know I don't deserve to say that, but it's true. I loved him like he was my own." Agent Hastings stood. "You'll have a chance to tell him that in court." The excavation began 2 days later. A team of forensic specialists descended on the strip mall parking lot, drilling through layers of asphalt and concrete. News crews gathered, cameras rolling, reporters speculating. On the third day, they found her. Celine Smith's remains were wrapped in a tarp, buried 6 feet below the surface. After 21 years, there wasn't much left, but dental records confirmed her identity. The general was there when they brought her up. He stood at the edge of the site, his face carved from stone, and watched as they loaded the remains into a black bag. Someone asked if he wanted to say something. He shook his head. He couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Celine was gone. He'd known it, deep down, for years. But knowing and seeing were 2 different things. That night, he sat alone in his quarters and wept, for the woman he'd loved, for the son he'd lost, for the years that had been stolen from all of them. Mateo requested permission to attend the funeral. The army granted it. He stood beside the general at the graveside service, both of them in dress uniform, as Celine Smith was laid to rest. There were maybe 30 people there. Friends from the old church, neighbors who remembered, reporters keeping a respectful distance. The pastor spoke about grace, about peace, about reunions in heaven. Mateo barely heard the words. He was staring at the casket, trying to feel something, anything. This was his mother, his real mother, the woman who had sung him to sleep, who had held him when he cried, who had loved him with everything she had, and he didn't remember her. After the service, the general approached him. "I know this is hard," he said. "I know you don't remember her, but she loved you, Nelson. More than anything." "I wish I could remember." Mateo said quietly. "I wish I could tell you I feel something, but I don't. I'm sorry." The general put a hand on his shoulder. "You have nothing to be sorry for. This isn't your fault, none of it." Mateo nodded, but he didn't believe it. He felt responsible somehow, like he should have known, should have questioned, should have fought harder to remember. Bruno Mendez's trial began in October. The courtroom was packed with reporters, victims' advocates, and curious onlookers. Mateo sat in the front row, beside the general. Bruno looked smaller than Mateo remembered, older, broken. When their eyes met, Bruno smiled sadly. Mateo looked away. The prosecution laid out a case methodically. The kidnapping, the murder, the decades of deception. They presented evidence. Bruno's confession, the forensic findings, DNA results, testimony from neighbors who remembered seeing Bruno at the Smith home. The defense tried to argue diminished capacity, claimed Bruno had been mentally unstable, that the death of Celine had been accidental. The jury didn't buy it. On the fourth day of deliberations, they returned a verdict, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Bruno Mendez to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the bailiffs led him away, Bruno turned and looked at Mateo one last time. "I'm sorry," he mouthed. Mateo said nothing. He just watched as the man who had raised him, who had stolen him, was taken away. Please consider sharing this story with someone who needs to hear it. Every share helps bring awareness to the thousands of families still searching for their missing loved ones. The months after the trial were the hardest. Mateo tried to return to his duties, tried to focus on being a soldier, but it was impossible. He couldn't concentrate, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about the life he'd lost, the mother he'd never know, the man who had lied to him for 21 years. The Army granted him leave. He moved into a small apartment near Fort Hood, close to where the general was stationed. They had dinner once a week. Awkward, stilted conversations where neither of them knew what to say. But they was trying. That was something. The general showed Mateo old photos, videos of Nelson as a baby, as a toddler, laughing and playing. Mateo watched them like he was watching a stranger's life, which, in a way, he was. "Tell me about her," Mateo said one night. "About Celine." The general's face softened. "Nay, she was the best person I've ever known, kind, strong, patient. She wanted to be a teacher. She loved gardening. She made the best chocolate chip cookies you've ever tasted." Mateo smiled faintly. "Did she love me?" "More than life itself," the general said. "You were her whole world." Mateo felt tears sting his eyes. "I wish I remembered her." "She would just want you to be happy," the general said. "That's all she ever wanted." Slowly, over time, Mateo began to heal. He started therapy, working with a specialist in trauma and memory recovery. Some memories came back, fragments mostly. A yellow kitchen, a swing set, a woman's voice singing, but most of his early childhood remained lost, locked away somewhere he couldn't reach. He learned to accept that, learned to let go of the person he might have been and focus on who he was now. And he re-enlisted in the Army, rose through the ranks, found purpose in service, in discipline, in honor. He kept in touch with the general. Their relationship evolved, not quite father and son, but something close. A bond forged not by blood or memory, but by shared loss and hard-won understanding. In 2018, Mateo met someone, a woman named Clara, a nurse at the base hospital. She knew his story. Everyone knew his story. But she didn't treat him like a victim. She treated him like a person. They dated for 2 years. In 2020, they got married. The general was there, standing beside Mateo as his best man. As they exchanged vows, Mateo thought about Celine, about the mother he'd never known and hoped she would be proud. Bruno Mendez died in prison in 2023. Heart attack. He was 74 years old. Mateo was notified. He felt nothing. No grief, no anger, just a distant sense of closure. He didn't attend the funeral, didn't send flowers, didn't acknowledge it. He simply moved on. Today, Mateo is 30 years old. He's a decorated officer following in his father's footsteps. He and Clara have a son, a bright, curious boy they named Martins, after the general. The general is 70 now, retired, living in a quiet house near Austin. He sees his grandson every week, tells him stories about his grandmother Celine, about the Smith family legacy. Mateo has become an advocate for families of missing children. He speaks at conferences, works with law enforcement, shares his story. He's written a book about his experience, about being taken, about the reunion, about a struggle to reconcile two identities. It's called The Boy Who Came Back. In it, now he writes, "I don't remember my mother's face. I don't remember her voice, her touch, the way she made me feel safe. I've lost those years forever, and no amount of therapy or investigation will bring them back. But I've learned that identity isn't just about memory. It's about choice. I choose to honor the woman who gave me life. I choose to build a relationship with the father who never stopped searching. I choose to move forward, not in spite of what happened, but because of it. I am Nelson Smith. I am Mateo Mendez. I am both, and I am neither. I am simply myself. And that's enough. There are still thousands of missing children, thousands of families waiting, thousands of cold cases that may never be solved. But Nelson Smith came home. After 21 years, he came home. And that makes all the difference. If this story moved you, nay, please share it. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories of hope, resilience, and the power of never giving up. Your support helps us keep these stories alive and brings awareness to the children still waiting to be found. Hit the subscribe button now and help us create more awareness. Thank you for listening.